My parents abandoned me as a child because I wasn't as smart as my twin sister. But keep listening to find out what happened next. 10 years ago, when I was 12, my parents sent me to live with my uncle, their solution to a problem they no longer wanted to deal with. He was my father's older brother, living in some remote village, and they figured it was easier to dump me there rather than continue raising me. They made it painfully clear that I was nothing but a burden to them. My twin sister, on the other hand, was their pride and joy, the smart one, the one worth investing in. And to be fair, she was brilliant. I could never keep up with her. I was just average. And in a family of overachievers and intellectuals, being average was the same as being a failure. Both of my parents were doctors, and they had already mapped out our futures. We would become doctors just like them, but I had no interest in medicine. I had no interest in school at all, if I'm being honest. Creativity was my passion. That was what made me feel alive. But my parents didn't care about that. They pressured me relentlessly, and when I struggled in school, they didn't offer support. Instead, they tore me down, constantly comparing me to my sister. I had gotten used to their disappointment early on, but as I grew older, it only got worse. By the time I was 12, I had completely lost control of my grades. No matter how hard I tried, I just couldn't keep up. My teachers saw me as lazy, assuming I just wasn't putting in the effort, completely unaware of what was happening at home. Even my classmates saw me as nothing more than my sister's lesser half, the one who would never amount to anything. I cried myself to sleep almost every night. My parents adored my sister, showering her with love and praise, while I was treated like a mistake, a problem they wished they didn't have. And every single day, they reminded me of that. One evening, during dinner, they started berating me about my grades again. I finally snapped. I talked back, raised my voice, something I had never dared to do before. And, of course, I was punished. 2 weeks. No leaving the house, no contact with anyone. That's when I decided to run away. I had no plan, no destination. I just knew I had to get out. But I didn't make it far. I spent the night alone in a nearby park, scared out of my mind, until the police found me around 5 a.m. My parents were forced to call them when they realized I was gone. That was it. That was the final straw for them. The next day, they told me they had made a decision. I was going to live with my uncle in the village. When they broke the news to me, I begged them not to send me away. I swore I would do better, that I would try harder, that I wouldn't disappoint them again. I even promised I would never try to run away again. But it didn't matter. They had already decided I wasn't worth the effort. They told me I had failed them one too many times, and they simply didn't have the time or energy to waste on a useless girl who kept letting them down. I don't think that was true. The truth was, they just didn't care about me. They only had eyes for my sister. They only acknowledged my existence when they needed someone to criticize. I pleaded with them, not because I loved them by that point. I wasn't even sure if I did, but because I didn't want to be separated from my sister. She was the only one in the family who treated me with kindness. But my parents didn't care. They forced me to say goodbye to her and forbade her from visiting me. When I arrived at my uncle's house, I cried for weeks. I just wanted to go home. I called my parents over and over again, but they never answered. My uncle and his wife tried to comfort me. They were good people, and they understood what I was going through. But my parents, they had simply erased me from their lives. Eventually, I accepted it. There was nothing I could do, but I refused to lose my sister. She was the only person I had left. We found ways to talk in secret. She didn't have a cell phone, so I would call her on the house phone when our parents weren't home. And when social media started becoming more popular, she found ways to message me on the computer. Sometimes, when she was sure the coast was clear, she would pick up my calls and we would talk. Even now, after all these years, we're still close. We love each other, and nothing will ever change that. She always kept me updated on what was happening back home, always made sure I knew what our parents were up to. And just recently she warned me they were planning to contact me. Because of her, I had time to prepare myself. It's been 10 years since I last saw them. At first, they ignored me because they didn't want me. And then, after a while, I ignored them because I no longer wanted them either. Honestly, when I moved in with my uncle and aunt, my life improved significantly. They didn't pressure me the way my parents did, and for the first time, I started doing better in school. I was still an average student, not a genius like my sister, but At least I wasn't failing anymore. My uncle and aunt let me participate in school plays and sports, things my parents had always forbidden because they believed it would ruin my grades. For the first time, I was allowed to enjoy life, and I was happy. When I lived with my parents, I wasn't even allowed to talk to boys because they thought it would distract me. My uncle and aunt didn't impose such ridiculous restrictions. They let me have friends, even allowed me to invite them over, and thanks to that, I met my husband. We've been together for 7 years now. We started dating in high school, were inseparable, and even went to the same college. Last year, we graduated together, and a week after graduation, we got married. It was a small ceremony, nothing extravagant, and last month we had our son. I don't live with my uncle and aunt anymore, but we bought a house just a few blocks away, and we visit often so they can see their grandson. Right now, I'm on maternity leave, but I'll be going back to work in a few weeks. My sister has been openly in contact with me for the past few years. When she turned 18, she decided she didn't have to hide our relationship from our parents anymore. There was nothing they could do about it. She was my maid of honor at my wedding and became my son's godmother. Last week, when she visited, she told me something I hadn't expected. Her parents were planning to reach out to me. They had no idea I was married or that they had a grandson. After they abandoned me, no one in the family thought they deserved updates on my life. Even my sister, when they asked about me, never told them anything. But now, after a decade, they apparently felt some kind of guilt and decided it was time to reconnect. My sister felt it was only fair to warn me so I wouldn't be blindsided when they eventually called or messaged. And sure enough, just a couple of days after she left, they reached out. A simple message on social media, asking if they could visit. No apology, no acknowledgement of the past, just a question. Can we come over? That was it. I won't lie, I was disappointed. A part of me had foolishly expected at least an attempt at an apology. For a moment, I was so angry that I considered ignoring them entirely. But then, I had a better idea. I decided to let them come. I wanted them to see my life, to understand just how great I was doing without them. So, I gave them my address and invited them over for dinner that weekend. Of course, I also invited my uncle, aunt, and sister. My husband and son would obviously be there too. It was our home, after all. What I didn't mention to my uncle and aunt was that my parents would also be there. So when they arrived that evening, the shock on their faces was unmistakable. That was 3 days ago, and even now, I'm still not sure if I did the right thing. The atmosphere was unbearable. I hadn't seen my parents in 10 years, and most of the family had cut ties with them entirely. My uncle and aunt had refused to have anything to do with them after what they did to me. They had agreed to take me in under the condition that my parents would stay in contact, that they would provide not just financial support but emotional support too. But of course, my parents had done only the bare minimum. They sent money, sure, but emotionally? They had abandoned me the moment they dropped me off. That was not what my uncle had agreed to. He had been furious at them, had defended me in front of the entire family, and because of that, he and my father had a falling out. Most of our relatives had sided with my uncle, turning their backs on my parents. Despite everything, my father still sent money until I turned 18. After that, all contact between them ceased. After a tense greeting, we all sat down for dinner, but before we started eating, I decided to make a toast. If things weren't awkward enough already, I wanted to push it even further, because I wanted my parents to regret. I wanted them to feel every ounce of guilt for what they had done to me. I stood up and began talking about how incredible the last 10 years of my life had been compared to the first 12. I dedicated my speech to my uncle and aunt because they had done so much for me over the past decade. I wasn't sure I could have achieved what I have now without their support. I also thanked my husband for always being by my side and my sister for never turning her back on me, despite all the difficulties. Very deliberately, I ignored my parents throughout the speech because I had nothing to thank them for. And they noticed. The entire time, they sat there, eyes downcast, saying nothing. As I wrapped up my speech, I decided to twist the knife just a little deeper. I turned to my parents and said, "I'm so happy to finally introduce you to my new family." The moment those words left my mouth, they looked absolutely shattered. They clearly hadn't expected me to say something like that. My mother burst into tears and ran out of the house. My father followed her, and I didn't even try to stop them. I felt they had earned every bit of this moment after years of neglect and cruelty. My husband and sister tried to talk to me afterward. They thought I had gone too far, that I shouldn't have treated my parents so harshly. But in my mind, I had simply stated the truth. They had abandoned me. None of this would have happened if they had chosen differently. After they left, the rest of the evening was suffocatingly silent. No one stayed for dessert. In a way, I was relieved. The whole situation had been too much to handle. I don't love my parents, but I'm still not sure if I did the right thing. I haven't talked to my uncle and aunt yet, but my husband and sister both think I went too far. They told me that if I didn't want to have anything to do with my parents, I shouldn't have responded to their message at all, let alone invited them to dinner just to humiliate them. So, am I an asshole for doing this? The responses to whether I should apologize to my parents were mixed, but everyone seemed to agree on one thing: I should at least talk to my aunt and uncle. While the issue with my parents remains unresolved, I decided to reach out to my aunt today. It's been a week since that disastrous dinner, and we've barely spoken since. I've been busy, and so have they, but today, I finally gathered the courage to call her. Before she could say anything, I immediately apologized for inviting my parents without warning her. She admitted she had been shocked by the situation, but ultimately made peace with it. She also confessed she hadn't reached out sooner because she wasn't sure how I felt after that night. She said I had looked deeply upset, and she didn't want to push me. She agreed that the dinner had been incredibly awkward, but reassured me that it was in the past, and she didn't hold any resentment. After that, I called my uncle and apologized to him as well. He responded in the same way. Now that I've cleared things up with both of them, I don't feel guilty anymore. Honestly, I don't feel like I owe my parents an apology. After everything they put me through as a child, I don't think anyone would consider my behavior unfair. They still haven't apologized to me, so I don't see why I should be the one to extend an olive branch. I talked about it with my husband, since he had initially suggested I apologize to them. I explained to him that while my actions at dinner might have been harsh, what they did to me in the past was far worse. He seemed to understand my perspective and didn't bring it up again. I told my sister the same thing. She was a bit skeptical, but ultimately agreed that, as the one who had been hurt, it was my decision to make. She also hasn't spoken to our parents all week. They've gone suspiciously quiet. I think they're just lying low for now, but I have no doubt they'll resurface eventually, either demanding an apology or creating another round of drama. First, I want to clear something up. My sister is not trying to play diplomat by maintaining a relationship with our parents. And even if she was, I wouldn't mind. There's nothing wrong with that. I noticed a lot of people in the comments made a big deal out of it, but the truth is, she fully understands how horribly they treated me. Back then, she was just a child herself. She couldn't stand up for me, couldn't protest to her opinions, simply didn't matter. But she did what she could. She kept in touch with me, and that was enough. The reason she still talks to them now is simple: they're getting older, and she doesn't want to abandon them. That's all there is to it. No secret agenda, no hidden loyalty, so please, stop blaming her. It's unnecessary, and between us, there's only love and trust. We don't see those kinds of comments as fair. Now, onto what happened next. As I mentioned in my last update, I was almost certain my parents wouldn't just let that dinner go. They are not the kind of people who know how to move on. I knew some kind of retaliation was coming. I just didn't know when or how. Well, today, it finally happened. 10 days after the dinner, they decided to take the conflict public. They posted about it on social media. That was unexpected. My parents were never really active online, but apparently they decided this situation was special enough to make an exception. And of course, the post was entirely one-sided, nothing but a sob story about how deeply hurt and betrayed they felt. Not a single mention of what they did to me in the past. Honestly, I wouldn't have cared if they had only shared this with our relatives. Most of them already cut ties with my parents over what happened to me, but they played it smart. Instead of just posting about it, they tagged me, my coworkers, and even my husband's colleagues. My husband, who had absolutely nothing to do with any of this. Obviously, my coworkers had no idea about my past, let alone my estrangement from my parents. So when they suddenly got dragged into this, they were completely shocked. My phone started blowing up with messages from them, all asking what the hell was going on. I had no idea my parents had posted anything at first. I'm on maternity leave right now, and I don't check social media often. I have my hands full with my son. But once my coworkers started messaging me, I was completely blindsided. I had no clue how to respond. I hadn't expected them to stoop this low. I'm pretty sure they found my coworkers just by going through my profile. I've tagged them in photos before, and knowing my parents, they probably spent the past week combing through my account, trying to find out who I associate with at work. For what? To ruin my reputation? I eventually saw the post. For the first few minutes, I just sat there in shock. But then I decided screw it. If they wanted to put this out in the open, then I would too. I left a comment explaining everything. I have nothing to hide. I was the victim here. What happened at dinner may have been harsh, but it wasn't undeserved. So I laid it all out, the way they abandoned me at my uncle's house, how they refused to stay in touch, and how, even after 10 years, they reached out without a single apology. Even when they showed up at my house, they still didn't say they were sorry. If they had, maybe things would have gone differently. Maybe I wouldn't have said what I said that night. But they didn't, so I don't regret anything. I also personally reached out to my coworkers, the ones they tagged. I apologized to them because they had no business being dragged into this nonsense. What my parents did was ridiculous. If they had a problem with me, they could have addressed it directly. Instead, they tried to pull innocent people into it. That's low. Even for them. Right now, I'm just waiting for my husband to get home. I didn't want to bother him at work because he mentioned he had an important meeting with a client today. But honestly, this is petty drama. I can handle it myself. I already talked to my sister. She thinks our parents have completely lost their minds. And she's probably right. They couldn't handle what they saw as disrespect, and they just snapped. But even that doesn't justify what they did. I haven't told my uncle and aunt yet. I know they would want to get involved, and I don't want to drag them into this. They have their own lives, their own work, and they don't need extra stress. But I know my parents aren't done yet. They're just getting started. Either they'll demand an apology, or they'll find a way to make even more of a mess. I guess we'll see. A few hours have passed since my last update. It's now 8 p.m., and everyone has gathered at my house: my uncle, aunt, sister, and my husband, who just got back from work. We're trying to figure out how to handle this situation. I don't want to involve a lawyer, despite the many suggestions to do so. I simply don't have the time or energy to deal with legal action. It's unnecessary, at least for now. Of course, if my parents refuse to take down the post, I might have no choice but to file a defamation lawsuit or something similar. But until then, we'll try to resolve it ourselves. So far, all of us, me husband, sister, uncle, and aunt have sent messages asking them to delete the post. They haven't responded to any of them. The only small victory is that they haven't removed my comment, which means that at least people who see the post can also see the truth. The problem is, the post is gaining traction. For some reason, it's getting more attention, which is really bad news for me. Not only have my coworkers seen it, but now acquaintances from outside of work are reaching out to ask questions. I have no idea how it ended up in their feeds, maybe because I was tagged in it. I've already removed the tag, but people keep messaging me, and I'm beyond tired of explaining the same thing over and over again. They could just read my comment and move on, but for some reason, they feel the need to ask me directly. It's exhausting, and I just want this to be over. Honestly, I'm praying HR doesn't call me in for a meeting over this. The last thing I want is for my professional reputation to be damaged because of my parents' nonsense. At this point, we're still waiting for a response from them. Tomorrow, my sister is going to visit them in person and ask them to delete the post. Hopefully, they'll listen to her. If they refuse, we'll have no choice but to take legal action. I really hope it doesn't come to that. It would take time and energy that I'd rather spend with my son. That's what maternity leave is supposed to be for, after all, not dealing with ridiculous drama caused by my parents. Today, my sister went to visit our parents and talked to them for about an hour. I had no idea how the conversation went until about 30 minutes ago when she called me to tell me everything. They admitted that they were extremely upset, which is why they made the post and tagged my coworkers. My suspicions were correct. They had stalked my online activity, tracking who I interacted with just so they could involve them in their mess. Creepy? Absolutely. But honestly, that's not even the biggest problem right now. My sister said the conversation was long and tense. In the end, my parents said they would delete the post, but only if I apologized to them. I immediately told my sister that wasn't happening. I didn't do anything wrong, and I refused to apologize. Thankfully, she already knew I wouldn't agree to that, so she told them straight up that I would never apologize for something that wasn't my fault. She also warned them that if they didn't remove the post, I would involve a lawyer, and things would only get worse for them. The negotiations dragged on for almost an hour, but finally they agreed to delete the post and put this whole thing to rest. However, they also made sure to tell my sister that they were officially cutting me out of their lives and their will. Honestly, I don't care. I just wanted the post gone. They can keep their inheritance. It means nothing to me. My husband and I are doing just fine on our own. We both have stable careers, and I know that no matter what happens, we'll be financially secure. I never wanted to depend on them, and I never will. My sister also made sure to tell them exactly how I feel about all of this. At least, now they finally know. With this issue finally resolved, I can now focus on enjoying the rest of my maternity leave with my son. That's what truly matters, not wasting my energy on pointless family drama. Thank you all for your support. Thank you for your attention. Subscribe, leave a like, and have a great day.